Today I want to share with you a story that runs deep. A story of hardship, courage, and the kind of quiet strength that can change the course of a life. It's about a young Apache man wrongfully bound to a tree by his own people, left as prey for the wolves and the woman who refused to let him die there. If this story finds a place in your heart, I hope you'll share your thoughts in the comments below. Now, let me take you back. The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the whisper of wind weaving through the branches. Moonlight cast long shadows over the canyon floor, where a young man named Talon stood tied against a rough cedar trunk. His wrists were lashed so tightly that blood traced down his arms, dark against his skin. This was no accident of war, no punishment from an enemy. It was his own people who had left him here. They claimed he had broken trust, but Talon knew the truth. It was envy, not justice, that bound him to this tree. And so he stood, abandoned, while the distant howls of wolves carried closer on the wind. Fear pressed on him like a second skin, but beneath it was something harder, something that refused to bend. He would not cry out. He would not give his enemies the sound of his weakness. Alone in the dark, he wondered if this was where his story would end. The hours crept by, each one colder than the last. Talon's head hung heavy, his body weak from thirst and the bite of rope against his skin. He thought the night itself would swallow him whole. But then, from beyond the ridge, came the faint crack of twigs underfoot. His weary eyes lifted. A figure moved carefully through the brush, lantern light trembling in her hand. It was a woman. Her name was Mira. She had not expected to find anyone here, let alone a man bound like an outlaw. Her breath caught. For a long moment, she stood frozen, torn between fear and pity. She knew what this meant. To interfere with tribal punishment was to risk her own standing, even her life. Still, her gaze stayed fixed on Talon. His eyes, though dimmed by exhaustion, burned with something she couldn't turn away from. "Why are you here?" she whispered to herself, though she already knew the answer. She could not walk away. Mira knelt quickly, fingers trembling as they worked against the knots biting into his wrists. Talon watched her, unsure if she was real or some spirit sent by the night. Their eyes met briefly in the shadows, his guarded, hers filled with quiet resolve. When the last rope fell loose, he nearly collapsed forward. Mira caught his arm, steadying him, her heart pounding at the risk she had just taken. She had chosen, in that moment, to defy fear itself. Talon could barely stand, his legs trembling beneath him as though the earth itself shifted. Every step was a battle. Mira slipped her arm beneath his, steadying his weight though it nearly pulled her down with him. The forest around them whispered with danger. From somewhere in the dark, a wolf's cry split the night, long and haunting. Talon's chest tightened. If the animals found them before they reached safety, neither of them would stand a chance. "Stay with me," Mira urged in a hushed voice, pulling him forward. Her lantern swayed, casting fleeting light against the rocks and roots that threatened to trip them both. He forced his body to move, leaning heavily on her strength. Each staggered step carried him further from the tree where his people had left him to die, yet deeper into another risk, the wrath of those who would discover Myra's choice. The sound of their breathing and the echo of wolves filled the space between them as they pressed on through the shadows. Talon's mind blurred with exhaustion, but one thought kept him upright. This woman had risked everything for him. And though he could not yet speak it aloud, he silently vowed he would not let her sacrifice be in vain. By the time they reached Myra's small shelter, Talon's strength had nearly given out. She pushed the creaking door open with her shoulder, guiding him inside before the night could claim him. The room was simple. A low fire burned in the hearth, its glow chasing away the chill. She eased him onto a rough wooden bench, then hurried to fetch water. Talon's hands shook as he lifted the cup she pressed into them, every swallow a lifeline. Mira tore strips of cloth from an old blanket, dipping them into warm water before tending to the angry cuts along his wrists. He flinched at her touch, not from pain, but from the strangeness of being cared for when hours earlier he had been left as nothing more than prey for the wild. Silence filled the cabin, broken only by the crackle of fire. Talon watched her move with quiet determination, every gesture precise and deliberate. He wanted to speak, to ask why she had risked so much, but the words would not form. Instead, he lowered his gaze, accepting her kindness without question. Mira said little, though now and then her eyes met his, cautious, searching. In that unspoken exchange, a fragile thread of trust began to weave between them. As dawn crept across the horizon, Talon stirred awake to the faint smell of bread warming by the fire. His body ached, but he felt stronger than he had the night before. Mira moved quietly about the cabin, careful not to startle him, though her mind raced with the weight of what she had done. When she turned, she found him watching her. His eyes held questions unspoken, yet neither dared break the fragile silence. Finally, she placed a small plate of food before him. "You should eat," she said softly, almost as if afraid the walls themselves might overhear. He nodded, lifting the bread with trembling hands. The taste was plain, yet to him it was life itself. With each bite, he felt strength trickle back into his veins. Outside, the world was waking. The cry of a hawk echoed from the cliffs, the sound carrying like a warning. Both of them knew it would not be long before others discovered his absence. And when that happened, Myra's defiance would come to light. Still, she did not regret her choice. As she watched him eat in silence, she realized she could no longer see him as the condemned man left to die. He was something more, a soul fighting to survive against impossible odds. And in that quiet moment, a bond began to take root, though neither of them spoke of it aloud. The days that followed carried a heavy stillness. Talon remained hidden within Myra's cabin, his body regaining strength though his spirit wrestled with unease. He knew the world outside had not forgotten him. Somewhere beyond those walls, men spoke his name with anger, perhaps already searching. Mira worked quietly, tending the fire, fetching water, and moving with the care of someone who knew eyes might be watching. Each time she stepped outside, Talon feared she would not return. And each time she did, relief washed over him like rain on parched earth. At night, when the fire's glow softened the shadows, their words finally began to surface. Mira asked about his life, though he shared only pieces, guarded and spare. In turn, she revealed fragments of her own burdens, losses that had hardened her heart, yet had not destroyed her will to choose compassion. Though their voices were low, the air between them carried an intensity neither could ignore. With every passing moment, the bond that had begun in silence grew stronger, shaped not by promises, but by the courage of what had already been risked. Still, the unspoken truth lingered in the cabin's walls. This fragile peace could not last forever. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, the sound of distant voices reached the cabin. Mira froze where she stood, her hands tightening around the edge of the table. Talon's eyes narrowed, every muscle in his body tensing. They both knew what it meant. The search had drawn closer. The voices faded, but the fear they left behind clung to the air. Mira moved to the window, peering through a sliver in the shutter. For a moment, she considered what she might say if they came knocking, what excuse might buy them time. Yet deep down, she knew words alone would not protect them. Talon rose slowly, though his strength was not yet whole. He placed a hand against the wall to steady himself, his gaze fixed on her. "You've risked enough," he whispered, voice rough from the weight of his debt. Mira turned to face him, her expression firm. "And I'd do it again," she answered without hesitation. Her defiance startled even him. The silence that followed was heavy, but within it lay an unspoken truth. The line between survival and sacrifice had blurred. They were no longer just fugitive and rescuer. Something deeper held them together, and it gave them both the courage to face whatever might come next. Morning light spilled across the valley, painting the cabin in gold. Talon stepped outside for the first time since his rescue, the cool air sharp in his lungs. The wounds on his body had begun to heal, but the scars of betrayal ran deeper than flesh. Mira joined him, her presence quiet yet steady at his side. Neither spoke at first. The world beyond still held danger, and the choice she had made could not be undone. But in the hush of that dawn, there was something unbreakable between them, a bond forged not from words, but from the night she had cut him free. Talon turned to her at last. His voice was low, but certain. "You saved me when no one else would. I won't forget." Mira met his gaze, her eyes reflecting both fear and courage. She did not ask for promises, nor did he offer any. What bound them now was not the certainty of the future, but the truth of what they had endured together. As the sun climbed higher, they walked back inside, side by side. Whatever waited beyond the horizon, they would face it with the quiet strength that had already defied death itself.